Well, thank you all for joining us again for another University of Idaho, University of Wyoming, and Utah State University Sheep and Goat webinar that we are now doing on a monthly basis. Today, we're going to talk about all things wool, and we're very excited for the lineup of speakers that we have today. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton off to Whit Stewart, who is your first speaker, and also I'm going to introduce the rest of our speakers today. So Whit, thank you very much for joining us today. And I'll let you have the floor.
All right. Well, thanks, Melinda. And we thank everyone who's with us today. We especially want to thank our speakers. I think there's such value when we can get together and share ideas and let others know what's going on across the industry. And we're confident we put together a pretty good swath of our wool industry today. I'm going to open things up and just talk about some general trends. And of course, we have the experts at the end that can correct every false doctrine that I preach today. But after my remarks will be followed by Heather Pierce, our ASI wool production and specialty markets consultant, and she's going to give us a heads up on the American Wool Assurance update. We'll then hear from an emerging entrepreneur or an established entrepreneur in the sheep business and the wool business, Albert Wild from Wild Valley Farms. He'll be followed by our hometown mill, Ben Hostetler from Mountain Meadow Wool, talking about wool quality considerations in the system that he operates in. And then we're really looking forward to our panelists and a Q&A at the end, just talking all things wool and especially marketing and quality insights in this year's clip. And that will be comprised of Bruce Barker from Great Plains Wool, Larry Prager from Center of the Nation Wool, Mike Horn from Roswell Wool, and then Ben Hostetler. And then any of our other speakers will have the opportunity to ask or answer some questions if directed their way. As I mentioned, I owe a debt of gratitude because many of the people that are on the speakers today have been providing last minute and updated stats for me. And just know that their willingness to share information is truly, it's generous. And without them, we wouldn't be able to share some of these things. I am often, I'm amazed by with such a quality product that we produce, sometimes the communication channels are smaller and less broadcasted. You know, when we look at all the aspects of how wool is produced and marketed in our country, you know, we start at the breeder level and the wool grower level. We have our wool warehousemen and our buyers that really are our main source of communication with some of our quality concerns or attributes. You know, our first stage processing, whether it's here domestic or abroad, sometimes that feedback loop or feedback comes through our wool buyers. And I think it's important that we try to integrate some of this conversation across the board where possible. And I think that's difficult, but each segment has different priorities and what they're looking for. And I think moving forward, one of the goals of our webinar series as we get into our spring months and do this annually is to really share some of those insights from different segments. And that will be a major talking point of what we discussed today. I want to thank Heather Pierce and Rita Samuelson from the Wool Council for providing some updated stats from the International Wool Textile Organization. I'm just going to share a couple of those that kind of give an overview from an international level. Our fiber consumption by end use, you can see that on this graph that I have here, we have Australian wool, we have wool, cotton, and then some other fibers as well. And this graph right here is just broken out to show some of the differences that exist perhaps with a very fine wool specialized production system in Australia, and the majority of that wool going towards apparel endpoint uses, versus a larger aggregated wool industry internationally that comprises even some of those broader fiber diameters with industrial and interior textile uses. You know, we are all aware of the higher price point that we deal with and the quality fiber that we deal with, but oftentimes we don't always look at the global dynamic that exists in wool production. I don't want to pretend that I am a wool marketing expert. That's why we have a panel today, but I think sometimes it helps to know internationally what is going on. And I think it's no surprise to us that the global downturn that we were talking about in last year's webinar this time has continued. I think we are seeing some positive indicators. You know, as reading some of the IWTO reports and just kind of compiling information across the industry, I think some of the most optimistic say a 2-year recovery. Those that are a little bit more bearish are about 4 to 5 year recovery. And our wool buyers can talk about that and provide their insights. But when we look at the import declines in these major first stage processing countries, you can see that these double-digit reductions from 2019 to 2020 really show the slowing of the trade internationally. And that's not to depress or to alarm, but that's just the reality that we're in right now. Wool export by major exporting countries. Again, this is no surprise. Relatively speaking, we're very minor players in the total volume of things. You can see that some of these declines that exist in some of our fine wool reputation clip countries, that these exports leaving these countries have been pretty dramatically reduced. And as a total internationally, that is down also. And we're all aware of this. This is not something new. So something that I'm interested when we just look at our US wool production, our total greasy production, and our wool exports. And again, sometimes the data is not widely available, but to calculate this, I took our grease wool production from our annual USDA NASS sheep and goat report, which arguably is a survey-based report, so it's not 100% accurate. But the export data I have much more confidence in, which again, thank you to the Wool Council, Rita and Heather for providing this, kind of shows some of the changes from 2005 to 2019 in the quantity of what's produced and the relative percentage that is exported of the total. I think when we graph this out and we get 2020, I think we're going to even see a decline from the 35% mark on the most recent estimate that we have from 2019. I think the reality is that some of the trade issues that preceded the global pandemic, that combined has really challenged our international exporting capabilities, especially at the price points that we want. In the bottom right corner, I just for context, provide the percent of total international wool exports, our major leaders being Australia, New Zealand, and then ours, which is about 0.02% of the total wool produced globally. So that's not to diminish our importance, but it's also maybe to put in context as things become backlogged, and there may be some that disagree. There's a lot of wool in storage, probably internationally, and we are not necessarily the highest volume that's ready to liquidate our stores when things start to get current again. And that's something to keep an eye on. Maybe for those of you that are thinking about marketing or that are storing, should probably understand that this backlog, especially with some of our broader fibers, is going to probably persist. This next graph, again, is a USDA AMS compiled data from the Livestock Marketing Information Center, and it's provided by Micron Range. Now, this is not the most accurate data because this lumps all of the regions of the US into one. But I think what I wanted to show with this graph primarily is, sometimes when we think of years marketing wool preceding really good years or proceeding very good years like we had in 17 and 18, sometimes it's hard to look back in the past a little bit. And I know our wool buyers could probably attest to that, it's not easy to tell growers that the price has gone down in a subsequent year when the previous years they've received more money for probably better quality wool. And that's a tough concept to swallow. But if we look back and look at some of our 20, 21, and 22 micron ranges, we're really not too far off 2010, 2011 type values for those various grades of wool. I just think it's worthwhile to keep in mind that historically we have trended upward in the price of the wool that we produce. Maybe it hasn't kept up with inflation perhaps, but sometimes when we see these drastic declines in prices, we're tempted to think that we haven't ever experienced these before. And I think there's some optimism for the future, especially based off of some of these recent prices that were provided to me in the past couple of days. One concern that really came out of the pandemic for me that I hope we can ask some of our panelists these questions is price discovery. How do we know what our wool is worth? And thinking about the system that USDA AMS uses, I think this system, it can be improved. Because if you think about it, the ability to report valid prices is entirely voluntary. So the price reporter that calls up some of our wool traders and says, what's these types of wool trading for? What have you traded in volume? That data is only as good as the willingness to share that data, but also collect all that data across our region and our country. We all know that our wool prices are highly based on Australian values, but some of our coarser micron ranges where there's not a tremendous amount of volume traded at those price setting auctions in Australia really limit our ability to do some price discovery in the 23 to 27 micron range. And again, I'm not going to take the place of the panelists. I just, as they hear this, I hope they'll comment to some of this towards the tail end. Generally speaking, if you want a generic estimate from 75% to 85% of Australia's reported value, usually the weekly National Wool Review produced by Chris Diaz from USDA AMS can give you a baseline to where that's at. There's all kinds of quality determining characteristics, yield, vegetable matter, all those things that would determine whether it's 75% of the Australian value or 85%, but it's still a very good starting point for you in addition to what your wool buyers will provide you. I really want to thank both Larry and Bruce for providing some of the resources that they have for pricing data. Sometimes going to those Australian resources and trying to do some of those conversions can be challenging for some of us. I provide an example here that, again, this will be posted on YouTube to show a little bit of how we go through that calculation of converting those Australian values to American clean wool values. And this example is a 19 micron based off of some of the prices that I just pulled off this morning. And again, I just want to highlight that sometimes we think our wool should be 100% of Australia's value, but having traveled internationally and observed some of the quality characteristics of clips internationally, I think it's important that we continue to strive in our wool preparation to make sure that our wool is clean, it's long enough, and that is high yielding so that we can compete and get the best price possible. So again, that bottom calculation there is for your reference to work through some examples on your own for those of us that enjoy doing those kind of things. As I wrap up my component, I just want to talk about storage and color change a little bit. Obviously, at the University of Wyoming, we're not storing a tremendous amount of wool, but looking at some of the research that has been done internationally on how the effect of storage and the storage environment, including relative humidity and temperature, can actually change that color over time. This is not for me to put emphasis on you all need to sell now if you can, but it's also to be realistic in saying that as we store wool, the way we put it up when it's baled, the shearing day, doesn't always translate in the same color quality that comes out before it goes into the scouring train. This will really change predominantly on the environment, but also how greasy and the suet and the stain that goes into the bale itself. The microorganisms that degrade that and the oxidation that occurs on that fiber, the extent of that change will really depend on how much grease and how much suet or some of those potassium salts are in the wool itself. I think more than anything is I discussed some of the research that's been done is we all know how important it is to put up dry wool, but that is especially important if we know that we're going to be sitting on it a while. Oftentimes when the value for coarser wool doesn't exceed the cost to shear them, I think we're quite apt to just put it up any way we can. And I think it's important that especially for those of us in the Intermountain West region where we produce a reputation clip that we make sure that it's dry, even with some of the scheduling logistics that our shearers might throw at us. So something to keep in mind. And finally, we talked about this last year, but I think it's important just to not assume that we always are on top of things. There is going to be a lot of carryover. Some of these estimates of where we're sitting at from carryover from 2019 at 16% of previous clips, and then 26% of the previous year's clip in 2020 was still stored. Again, those are values provided by ASI, but the point is there's going to be a lot of wool stored, especially during some of these down markets. And I think it can't be emphasized enough, much like we have to put up dry wool when we're shearing, we also have to make sure that we keep it in a dry environment. And I'm always blown away. I love evaluating wool. I love wool. I love wearing wool. I'm always blown away that sometimes we're just relieved to get the wool off and that bale will sit anywhere. I think we should be deliberate in how we store that. I think it's important to probably get it off the floor. Again, that wool is moisture loving. It will hold on to vapor moisture from the air. It's important to keep that off of the ground or put pallets, railroad ties, poles, something to elevate it and keep some airflow on the bottom of those bales. Obviously, some of our sheds have varying degrees of shelter. Some of our roofs are a little leakier than others, that figuratively and literally, and it's important that we definitely keep those bales covered up so that we can avoid some of the degradation that can occur during storage. And not assuming things with our insurance adjuster. I think there's definite value in this wool, whether it's stored for a year or whether it's going to be marketed this year. I think it's important to revisit some of those things so that we're not making any incorrect assumptions, so that we can continually market the best clip possible. I want to introduce Heather Pierce, if that's okay. Heather is not only a great fiber enthusiast, but is a great resource that we have at ASI. I've worked with Heather very closely on wool judging efforts, and to a lesser extent, some of the other initiatives that we've shared together. But we're really looking forward to this American Wool Assurance update. And Heather, we're grateful for you being here today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Whit. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this and excited about this new program. We hope that it'll provide another marketing opportunity for growers, and also allow us to share our story. So again, this is a new program. We're still developing components of it. And so it's the American Wool Assurance Program. And for a while, we've known that consumers are really wanting to know more about products. So with eggs, you might think, is this egg free ranged? And is this cooler ice chest made in the USA? And if it's Igloo, it actually is. And then some things like wine, where is it made at? Is it grown in California? And then meat is, they want to know where it came from. Does it have any hormones, or is it organic? And they want to know how it was raised. So was it raised with care? And that's what the American Wool Assurance Program looks at, is animal care. And so again, our consumers are wanting to know more about the products they are buying. And so since they want to know more, this actually provides us with a great opportunity to share our story with them, because we are doing a great job raising these sheep. And so it allows us to share our story, and also gives us a marketing opportunity that I'll go into in just a little bit. And important to know that AWA is voluntary, and it can be done by just about any wool grower. So it's for everybody. And it was developed between ASI and CSU. So CSU helped write it with a lot of input from the industry. So this program is a little bit unique in that it really came from the ground up. We had a lot of input from growers and shearers, a lot of different people from the industry. It's also centered around the 5 freedoms. And so those are the standard for animal welfare. So it's centered around that. It's science-based. And it's part of the Sheep Safety and Quality Assurance Program. And that's really looks at general sheep care. And then ASI goes one step farther and looks at wool sheep care. And also important to note that it exceeds international standards, and we are working on USDA certification for the program. And these standards, so there's a list of standards within the program that we ask producers to meet. And they look at year-round aspects. So things like management, how are staff and employees trained, stress, reducing stress year-round, nutrition and hydration and feeding, how the facilities are set up and handling sheep, transportation, reducing predation, general health measures, and including lambing, docking, castration, and a very extensive section on shearing. And so just for an example, standard 11.1 says wool sheep should be shorn at least annually. So most of these standards are things that you're probably already doing. And there are 3 levels to the program. So the first one is level 1 educated. So you go through an online educational course, and that'll provide you with a level 1 certificate. Level 2 is process verified. And for this, you're going to go through that level 1 education, and then you're going to go and develop an operating plan and implement that, and then hold records to show that all those standards are being done. And then that's going to go through an more or less an audit with a second party. So someone like a veterinarian or extension, and that has to be done every 2 years. And then this will provide you with a level 2 certificate, a stencil to mark your wool bales with, and an e-certificate. Level 3 is fully AWA certified. And so with that, again, you're going to have that level 1 education and then do the same operating plan and records, but then you're going to go through a third-party audit with an actual firm. And that either an evaluation, so like that second party, or an audit has to be done at least every other year, with an audit being at least every 4 years. And this will provide you with a certificate, a stencil for the wool bales, an e-certificate, use of the AWA logo, and then if you would like, you can be listed on the website. And one more point on this. So really, it captures a broad range for anybody. So whether you just want to go through the educational component of it, or if you want to go all the way to the 3rd level, it really opens it up for any grower and any buyer. Some buyers are going to be looking for different things, so this gives the opportunity for that. And then it's also traceable. So those bales will be marked with an AWA stencil, and they'll have to be kept separate. And then an e-certificate is available for the buyers, so that they can see that the certificate is valid and that you did go to that level. And a producer can actually choose how much information they want shared. So they might just want to choose that the buyer can see that the certificate is valid, or they can share their ranch name and their location, since buyers are interested in that. And then to keep the wool certified through the processing, it will need to trace through the chain. And then if they want to keep it, use AWA branding, then the wool has to be 100% certified or process verified. So all of these work for the process verified and certified wools to show that they are meeting those standards. And so again, this is an opportunity, a great opportunity for us to share our story about the great job that we're doing and tell consumers what we are doing. And it's also another marketing tool in our toolbox. If we think of wool and quality, and we have really short wool that's heavily contaminated, it's not going to have a whole lot of options on where it can be processed and what kind of product it can go into. But if we have a nice long wool that's very clean, no contamination, high quality, was stored well, as Whit said, this gives it a lot of opportunities, a lot of channels and products that it can go into. And so kind of like with stock markets, to tell you to diversify, it gives you more options. And so this AWA program is just providing another option. It's another market that your wool could go into. And so that it could make it easier to sell. And there also is a potential for a premium. And to find out if that potential is there, it's good to talk to your buyer or warehouseman. So where are we now? The program standards are available. So this list of standards are set. And we are currently just in the final stages of a website and then an online educational course. So those are nearly done. And then we're also working on the audit instruments, so the actual audit that producers would go through, and then training of those auditors and evaluators. And then the next step, perhaps most importantly, where should producers go now? The website and the online educational course are set to be done by May 15th. So mark your calendars, keep on a lookout for the weekly updates, because that is coming, and that will allow you a lot of different resources for the program and will allow you to complete that level 1 education part. And then even now you can start keeping records, really good records that can prove if you do want to go to that level 2 or 3, it can help you get there faster if you already have those records. So I hope you are as excited about this program as we are. And I think Rita, the Corollas Samuelson, might also be on. And so we're happy to take any questions. And anytime, feel free to call or email us.
Excellent. Thank you, Heather. Heather, I had a question. The e-certificate that is generated, is part of that also designed to be tracked through to the first stage processing level, or is that just predominant? I mean, tell me about that sequence of events.
Sure. So once you have that certificate, you'll actually get a certificate, and you can share a number. So everybody will get a special code with their certificate, and you can share that with your wool buyer. And so yeah, you can choose how much information you want to share with them. And so that number can travel with the wool as it goes, and then they are able to go back on the website and actually check what the status is of the certificate, and if you choose like the ranch name, the state, the location.
Great. And the announcement for those training opportunities will be blasted out through ASI Wool Council, so we can share those.
Yes, yep. So the date is May 15th for the website and the online learning module. And so that learning course. And so to access the course, you'll have to create a login within the system, just so we can track what the progress is and then get a certificate generated. So you will have to create a login, and then yeah, stay tuned for more, because there'll be a lot more coming with this program and trainings for evaluators and everybody.
Okay, we have just two quick questions that we'll entertain here. The first one was says, does the website have the practices to be tracked and to know what records to keep? I assume all that information's there.
Yes, yep. So records will need to be kept for each standard. So just to prove each standard that you are meeting those. So either in your operating plan or in your records. And so they're on the website. If you create an account, you'll have access to the actual set of standards, the actual document, and then resources that'll help you, give you templates for records, that sort of thing.
Okay. And then the second question is, any thoughts on what a full level 3 certification will cost producers? And if it figured by pound or by ranch certification as a lump sum kind of a thing?
We have had some estimates, so they're very broad estimates. And what we hear from auditors for an actual full level 3 sounds like anywhere from about $1,200 to $1,600, $1,800. Some of it just depending on how far they have to travel. And so we hope that if you are interested in going that far, make sure you talk with your buyers so that you can recoup that cost in some kind of premium for your wool. Excellent. And that's also why you only have to do an audit every 4 years.
Yeah, yeah. Good. Well, it looks like that's all the questions that we immediately have. Our next speaker today is Albert Wild from Wild Valley Farms. Albert has a really excellent story, and Albert, while you're getting yours set up, I will try not to butcher your introduction, and I'm going to emphasize try. So Albert has been an entrepreneur for many years, and I'll let him give some more details in that regard. But many of us may be familiar with some of his pellets that are used for horticulture purposes, utilized from the belly. I'm sure he's going to talk a little bit about that. But one of the many reasons we wanted Albert to talk to us today is there's no better time for innovation than in these down markets. And I think taking control of some of our price discovery and value adding some of these things to our wool clip is what Albert has been doing a long time, and has some new initiatives that I hope he'll introduce today. And Albert comes to us from Utah, not too far from Tooele, correct? Or am I way off?
No, we're about an hour and a half from Tooele north. We're about an hour north of Salt Lake there.
Excellent. Well, it's all yours, Albert. Thank you for being with us today.
Okay, well, thank you, for this opportunity. So this is what I've been asked to talk about is our wool pellet product. And let's see what, we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to show okay, so did that move to the next slide? I hope so.
Sure did. Yep.
Oh, perfect. So many of you may ask, what are wool pellets? Wool pellets are just the waste wool that we have taken, and then we pelletize just like a wood pellet that you would use in a wood burning stove. But instead of burning these pellets, they're used as an innovative organic fertilizer, and they're made from 100% American sheep wool. Originally, this wool most of it was just being thrown away, which is why it's considered a waste wool. And there's nothing else added to it. It's just the wool. So what makes the wool pellets different from other organic fertilizers are really in horticulture, there's three major problems. One is water and water retention. With the wool pellets, they hold the water in the soil and reduce watering needs by 25%. They also, the second problem is feeding the plants. And the wool pellets feed plants. They start on day one, feeding the plant, and they last for over 6 months. So they'll last the whole season. Another unique characteristic about wool, Will had mentioned about storing wool is, wool likes to absorb moisture. And that's a huge benefit when you're trying to reduce watering needs. But with every other product on the market, when you absorb moisture or water, then you also reduce your porosity. And that porosity is the oxygen in the root zone, which makes it so the plants can get root rot or other things. And with the wool pellets, not only do they hold the water, but they also expand. That wool tries to bounce back to its original form. And so that creates and maintains a 20% porosity, which is what you're looking for your plants. This is a trial that we did showing the ability for the wool pellets to hold the water. They're on day one. Both the control and the soil with the wool pellets in them started at the same weight, and then the water was added. And you can see that the orange line is the soil, just a regular traditional soil, which is 70 peat, 30% perlite. And it was just below 4 there. And then the wool was about 5. So a little bit more than that's actually like the weight of it. So, quite a bit more it was holding. And then over the 7-day period, each of them continued to lose moisture, but the wool pellets again maintained quite a bit higher moisture in the soil for the plants. And then as far as feeding goes, this is one of the trials that we first started with, which was tomatoes. And on the left, or on the right side of this picture there, those tomatoes are tomatoes without any fertilizer or just straight blood meal. And the blood meal we knew was 45 days for it to start to break down, which this picture was taken at 49 days. And so you can see that those tomato plants with the blood meal have just started to grow. And then on the left side of the picture are the tomato plants with the wool pellets in them. And you can see the huge difference. And we did 5% wool pellets and 10% wool pellets. And for this greenhouse grower, it was taking him 76 days to grow these tomatoes to the size that he wanted to have them market ready to ship to stores. And these tomato plants were ready in 38 days. So it basically half the time that it took for him to grow those plants and have them ready. So he could double his crop. So right now, our Nutriwool pellet users are anyone from farmers to greenhouses, gardeners, rooftop gardens, container gardening, indoor offices, municipalities, beautification projects. And these are some of the different pictures that people have sent to us that they've used, from growing organic corn to, those tomatoes, and even the state record for the giant pumpkin in the state of Utah is now held by Matt McConkey. And because of his use of the wool pellets, he was able to grow his giant pumpkin about 250 pounds heavier than the previous record. And then the last picture's there in the greenhouse, and this was actually a trial that we were doing, and all of those flowers there, the impatiens and that have been 8 days without water in those 4-inch pots. And so this is a huge benefit for, greenhouse growers and for the end consumer also. To kind of show and talk about a little bit of our growth, we started in 2016 with the wool pellets, and we sold about 4,000 pounds, which was mainly just to that one greenhouse grower who was able to get a contract with Costco to put it into hanging baskets to go into Costco. And that's here in Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming. And then 2017, we had quite a bit of growth. 2018, some more growth. 19 growth. Last year with COVID, we actually had a lot of growth, and that may be our online sales really increased with COVID, but also part of that growth of 2020 has just been the ability for some of the larger growers to take the wool pellets and trial them themselves, and then seeing what the benefit and the how they work, have now started placing orders. And you can see in 2021 in the first 3 months already of the year, we're about 8,500 pounds of wool pellets that we've sold. So we're really excited to see it continue to grow, and there's a lot of possibility here as we move forward. One of the things that we've done also is we're starting a new commercial wool testing lab, and one of the reasons that we did this is, and I partnered with a company called Grip 6 to do this, but with the pelletizing wool, it's such a new technology. No one knows how to do it. When I first started, I called everyone who was an expert in the country and asked them, what I would need to know to try and pelletize wool, and no one had any answers. No one was able to give me any answers, had never done it. And so then, we developed that ability. Even the University of Vermont, the professors there had thought, well, they could just pelletize it themselves. And that was part of the trial that we've done with them with row crops is, they couldn't make the pellets. And so then they paid for me to come out there and kind of show them how to do it. But some of the things that we need is, testing for the micron, for the grease and for the debris, the dirt, and that it's in the wool that we get, so that we can streamline the process of making the pellets much easier and more efficient. Most of the pelletizing we've been doing is just by hand, and opening each bale of wool by hand, and then assessing what that is, and as you've got your mill going, and then you're trying to figure out if the pellets are if it's making good pellets or not, and that's what we found is all of these things do make a difference. Wool with higher microns are easier to pelletize. So instead of having a 19 micron, we want like a 28 or a 30 or a 36 micron. The higher the micron, the better the pellets are, and the easier it is to pelletize. Wool with higher grease are harder to pelletize because there's so much grease in those pellets that they become very soft, and we can still pelletize it, but we just have to be able to blend that heavy grease wool with wool that's not quite as greasy. And then one of the biggest problems that we have is pelletizing the raw wool is that when we get wool with a lot of dirt, or some of it even has rocks, and metal, ear tags, or all sorts of different things, then that cost us more time, more handling, more cleaning to try and get the wool ready so that we can put it into the pellet mill. Because when you've got $1 million pellet mill, you don't really want to be throwing, a lot of rocks, even very small rocks into that mill, which is one reason why we want to try and make that a little bit more efficient is, kind of know what's in the wool before we get it to that point. So this is, the introduction of our wool lab, the Wasatch Wool Laboratories, and we just had a open house with that, and we're having another one on the 20th, which if anyone would like to, is going to be here in Utah, or you're here in Utah and you would like an invite, please just send me an email or call me, and I'll get an invite sent out to you so that you can see the lab, you can see the processes, you can see what we're doing, and kind of we like to share our vision of for the wool industry, not just testing, but even as we move forward, showing a closer working relationship with with the wool pellets and with the textiles and end products. So part of our marketing and education efforts I wanted to touch on is, we have distributors throughout the US and Canada, and we've created co-op advertising with those distributors, which has been nice because then they can market to their customers about the wool pellets and about our product, and then it doesn't cost us as much to get that reach, because really what we're doing here is creating a whole new market for wool. I mean, this is something that people have never heard of or seen or done before, and they have a lot of questions, and most of them see that and then they go, really, it's like you're a snake oil salesman or something, and which is why people want to try it and test it out, which has been fantastic, even if they will try it. And which is why we started with an 8-ounce packaging, just because with the price point we could keep it where people would be able to try it and spend the money to do that. But our print ads through industry publications, and the industry publications are mainly in gardening publications, promotions, articles with industry influencers. Last year, we picked up a Master Gardener influencer, and she's done a fantastic job. Last year, we had 400 newspapers, magazines that picked up 2 different articles that she wrote for us, because people are intrigued. It's something, for the gardening industry. We've had a lot of comments of people telling us, there's nothing new in gardening, and this, really is new. This is different. We've also, created Google and social media ad campaigns, and then we've been attending expos and events for gardening, reaching out to organic farmers and doing trade shows. And, our biggest challenge is the education, trying to get people educated. And that's kind of part of the uphill battle. We know that we face an uphill battle trying to change the way people think about using wool and the wool fiber. And, we've been fighting this battle. We're seeing success, and mostly to key partners who have been making a difference. Partners like Costco and Pioneer, the American Farm Bureau, University of Vermont, and Grip 6, and then gardencom.org. All of these, I think it's really important to, whether it's wool pellets or whether, it's marketing our wool on a the finer micron wool to clothing, getting key partners who believe in the product and can help us, expand that education, I think is really key. And so, that's something that we're trying to do here on our farm and with what we are doing with this product. Anyway, that's my presentation. So I guess I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Albert. We've got a couple for you. This is really informative. I assume one of the questions was, you're taking this raw wool, doesn't need to be processed prior, right? You're just kind of breaking it up before you put it in your pelletizer, right?
Yeah, so the wool, with the pelletizing process, the thing that you have to do is you're trying to get the product in a consistent manner, fed into the pellet mill in a consistent, speed, at a consistent speed. And so, that's been the biggest struggle that we've had is, trying to do that. And the more you can do that, the better the product is.
One thing that was interesting that you mentioned, Albert, was, the broader microns. Are you sourcing those predominantly within state, or would you like a more streamlined ability to get those broader microns, the bellies, the pieces? I mean, what is these people are packaging and marketing their wool? What are you looking for in that regard? The bellies or just the pieces?
You know, we use any of the bellies, the pieces, the tags, black wool, any colored wool works great. We bought wool from almost all of the wool warehouses throughout the country. We've been buying wool from individuals from Vermont to California. And the biggest thing that we want to see is, and people, our biggest problem right now is we've had so many people wanting to sell us wool that I can't buy all the wool that people want to sell right now. I'd like to be able to get the number of what we're selling up. And, as we've talked to some of the really large companies that would see a huge use of wool, like 1 million pounds or more a year, their big concern that they have is, can we source enough wool for what they would need? Most of them don't want to start into, commit their marketing to a project of this, even though they love the science, they love the idea, until we can show them that there is enough, supply out there, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's an excellent use for a low price point type of a wool for sure. There's a couple of questions that I'm going to synthesize for you, Albert, that kind of talked about when the breakdown of that fiber occurs, what does the soil look like and what's the time frame that it takes for it to kind of essentially disappear altogether in some of the horticulture applications you've seen?
So, with that tomato trial, what that showed us, and subsequently we went to Utah State to find the release curve. What it showed us is that the wool's providing 4,000 parts per million of nutrition on day one. And because we used raw wool, what we found is that's the grease or the lanolin that's in that wool that provides a quick release to the plants. And then about day, so it has a spike and then it comes down to a trough about 800 parts per million on day 20. But then the wool itself starts to break down and it goes back up to about 2,500 parts per million. And so it's a very, very unique release curve. And it takes at about 3 to 3.5 months, 4 months maybe, if you have the pellets into the soil, you don't see any fiber. I mean, it's hard to see the fiber. It is still having water holding capacity, which is, fantastic. But it's, you don't really see it. One of the complaints that we've had from, again, some of the bigger companies, or not really complaints, but concerns, I guess, before they use it is, having it on top of the soil and being able to see it. And the pellets don't break down as quickly on top of the soil as if they do in the soil. And yet the wool itself is just the nitrogen. It's a high nitrogen, anywhere from 9 to 13%, depending on where the sheep come from, what breed they are, those things.
Excellent. Great. I think we covered those soil health questions. And if we didn't, we've got a little bit of time because we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Here's a hard left question for you, Albert. Going back to your discussion of your collaborations with Grip 6 and Wasatch Wool. what is your long-term goal with this partnership with Grip 6? And then long-term plan for your objective measurement lab with Wasatch Wool?
So, so with our partnership with Grip 6, I mean, Grip 6 is a company who is making wool socks right now, and wanting to expand and make other wool products. And that's what I think is important, is having key partnerships with people who, one, believe in the product that we're producing, and and not just believe in it like, hey, we think we can sell this, but also turning and saying, hey, we want to be able to help the industry and improve the industry. And so that's kind of the goal there with Grip 6, is being able to, I mean, we'd like to see more manufacturing, more processing here in the US. One of the presentation slides that we have with the open house is, all the countries in the world have declining sheep numbers except for one, and that's China. And China has an increasing since 1960. All the countries have been going down. China's been going up. China's also the only one that's increasing their processing. And New Zealand has the same problem. People think, oh, New Zealand, Australia, they produce a lot of wool. We're having the same problem right now. Wool sitting in warehouses because China's can't take it, and China says, well, we can't take it because the U.S. won't buy our product anymore because of this trade war. And the end product is the U.S. U.S. is the largest market, and we want to ignite, I guess, some of that manufacturing ability. And the first step was having this wool lab, not just because it helps us in making the pellets more efficient, so that we can keep the cost down as we move forward to sell those, but also to help the whole industry. I mean, for us, as we lose key components of all of this processing or manufacturing, it's setting us back, and it's driving more and more of the producers out of business. And so that's kind of our goal is, we want to stop that bleeding.
And a related question, Albert, thank you. That was a great answer. Do you, I mean, as you think about certification and quality control, are you kind of wanting to go more the ASTM route or the IWTO certification? What are some of those safeguards you have in place as a lab?
Yeah, so right now what we're doing is we're using the IWTO standards and the ASTM standards for the wool testing, for both the wool base and the vegetable matter, and then the micron testing, which is important. I mean, that's what you have to do. And then, I mean, one of the things that we know is that a lot of it is based on, on trust. And so, the things that we've tried to, offer, or that we are offering for, the wool warehouses, for the buyers, and that is to be able to come out, also to be able to, give us a sample, and then we'll test it according, to what we're doing, and according to those standards, which is the same standards that New Zealand or Australia or any of them are using. And then, send that same sample, just split it, half to us, half to New Zealand, and then they can get the results back. I mean, we're confident enough because of the tests that we've done that people, the buyers will see, oh, this testing is, right in line with New Zealand. And, and so then it just makes sense to, keep it here in the US.
So do you think you'll want to go through the trouble of maintaining those certifications, or what are those plans to get those certifications with those?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have a lab here in the U.S. that is, world class. That's as good as any lab in the world, and and that's again our goal with that is we want to be really efficient with the lab. We want to be able to grow and expand and have that so that there's not wasted time. So there's not wasted manpower in doing those things. And, we started with the lab and with what we've got right now, with an eye to the future. continuing to improve those things. And even right now we are, as we, we're looking to develop the NIR system here with American Wool. And that's going to take some time, but we've got some key partners that are helping with that.
Great. Thank you, Albert. There was some questions going back to that trial, that figure you showed of the nitrogen release or nutrient release. This question was, what day was the 2,500 part per million spike in nutrient release as the wool fiber is starting to break down? I guess, where was your peak in that nutrient release? What was the day?
I'd have to look exactly. It's kind of funny because there's, with both the blood meal and with the wool, there was a climb and there was a peak, which was about, the first peak was about, I'd have to say like a day 45 when it peaked. And then there was a trough. And that peak was a little bit more than 2,500, is probably like 2,800 parts per million. And then there was a trough where it dropped back down to about 2,400 parts per million. And then there was a second peak, and which was really interesting because that's not something you see with any synthetic fertilizer. But we found that with both the blood meal and the wool pellets, that both of them had, a double spike instead of just a round curve, bell curve. The unique thing again was the wool pellets were providing nutrition on day one, which is just fantastic for any organic.
It's amazing. What a great story to tell from a soil health standpoint. One more question for you. Do you think hair cross wool would pelletize okay? Going back to what you said, you prefer a broader diameter. Have you tried any of those non-valuable hair wool cross fleeces?
So yeah, we've pelletized all sorts of stuff. We've pelletized alpaca. We've pelletized, the cowtail, which is kind of the hair wool cross stuff. And one thing that we found is the hair is about 3% nitrogen, so it's not as high as the wool itself. And then the other thing is the wool or the hair crossed. If there's a lot of wool or a lot of hair in the wool, it becomes harder to pelletize. It doesn't stick together as well, making a better pellet. One thing about that is we are looking to, we've been doing a lot of research and development and looking to be able to use that wool in another product. We're working on 2 or 3 different new products in which we can just use that wool.
Excellent. Well, this is really exciting stuff. Bear with me, Albert, as I just try to make sure I get any of these other questions answered. And again, those tuning in, if you want to repost some questions later on, if we bribe Albert, we can get him to stick around for the panel, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that looks about right. Albert, we are just really grateful. Again, when was the open house? You have another one coming up, correct? You want to put in a plug for that?
Yeah, the next open house is April 20th. And we decided to do that because on the first one, we invited a lot of the buyers, but most of them aren't here in Utah, but they were all coming to Utah for a sale that Will Griggs was having at Utah Wool Marketing. And so, we said, well, we'll just do this again. And so, but yeah, we're just inviting anyone else also that if you'd like to come, to come, because we want to be as open and transparent as possible with everyone.
So have them send you an email and then you'll get them an RSVP kind of invite kind of a thing?
Yep.
Great.
That would be great.
Great. Melinda, I'm going to hand it back to you. Thank you, Albert.
Thanks.
So our next speaker today is Ben Hostetler with the Mountain Meadows Wool Mill, and he's going to visit with us about wool quality considerations in value-added processing. So Ben, thanks for joining us today, and I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun to be with everybody today. One of the big things, when we're looking at these wool markets and, the wool market globally this past year, a lot of people are looking for alternatives of where they're going to take their wool. How do I get more value for my clip? And taking a 30% or more decrease in your value from year to year is a tough one to swallow for any operation. And so that's totally understandable. I get requests, usually at least 1 or 2 new ones a day asking for, what do I have wool? Can I process it? Are you guys buying? Are you guys looking for wool? Similar with Albert there is we as a regional processor, we're too small to bring in lots of new wool. So I can be pretty specific in terms of the wool I buy. So I want to buy basically just the best of the best is what I want to bring into our facility. So I can be pretty choosy. That said, we get a lot of our production would be small producers, and this would be around the country from Florida to Maine to California, Alaska even, that will send in their own wool for their production from their fleeces. So they're hobby farms or they're small ranchers or even large operations who are wanting to bring value to their clip for processing. A couple of things that are different as a regional processor, we are opening every bale and looking very hands-on to that entire bale as it goes through production. So we notice all the imperfections. So if you look at the old saying, pulling the wool over someone's eyes, I was looking that up the other day, and the history of that was back in the Middle Ages. A lot of people were wearing big hoods, and it was common for thieves to throw the hood over their eyes and then cut their purse strings and steal their wallet. Similar true with wool side. So I get bales and I open up a bale, and someone will say, "Oh, this is premium clip, or this is really nice wool." You open the bale and you see all the imperfections that were kind of being hidden during shearing. So we get, it's the string, it's the baling twine, it's the bellies and tags that are just swept up, it's the sweepings on the floor. And so I would say as a number one thing to do is don't throw all that into the bag. We're going to notice it at a small scale. And even your large scale. I know all the wool buyers, the commercial buyers on this panel would say that at some point that's going to come back down the supply chain to say, where did this wool come from? It may be a little harder to track, but we definitely see it at a small scale. And when I'm talking about that, I'm going to show a couple samples here. This would be a small producer, and then we'll hand it up to the camera here. A small producer, and they want something custom made with their wool. What we have here is just a big chunk of just a big tags, right? So they might send in 20 pounds, and they've included this in their wool for production. And they just wasted their time for shipping it, for packaging it. Any charge we have on scouring that's based on a greasy weight, it just adds cost that's not needed. And so we like to talk to producers and say, go through that clip. If you're going to do something for yourself, you want your best product possible as well. Get rid of those bellies, those tags. Take the extra time and build yourself a little skirting table at shearing and do a light skirting. It amazes me how few operations actually do any skirting at all on site. So usually it's, the shearer has it handled, right? Well, the shearers, they're in there, their good job is to get that wool off the shearing floor and into that bale and get it out of there and keep up with those shears. And I think it's up to the rancher's responsibility to say, hey, I want to do some extra sorting, some extra classing of that wool on site. Because one, I want to improve my own personal quality if I want something made with it. And number two, I want to take it to a commercial warehouse and say, yes, we have heavily skirted this. We know we've removed a lot of those bellies and tags. And I think that just ups your performance, especially in a low wool market. You're competing with everybody for a pretty low price. And so if you can add value to it, just at that initial shearing stage of the process, it gives confidence to the buyers. It gives confidence to me as a regional mill that we can then take that. And I know when someone calls me and said, I've heavily skirted this, and usually I'll talk to them a little bit, what do they mean by skirting? And we'll talk through some of those questions as well. I remove the bellies, and I say, well, that's good, but did you remove, in the neck? Sometimes you'll get big batches of alfalfa or straw or hay from feeding, and did you remove that? Did you throw the fleece just briefly onto a table and just do a quick visual? Those things definitely help us as a small producer or processor in downstream processing. So removing those bellies and tags, another visual here for you all that we'll hand up to the camera. What we have here is we've got some paint brand, right? So that's pretty common out there, especially our larger operations. And then it might not show out real well, but there's a big chunk of some of that vegetation in there. So just a big matted mass of vegetation. And at our scale, what I just showed you came from a nice ranch, right? They're a good commercial operation. They've got a nice wool clip. But when we take that bale and process it, I know that that whole handful is going to contaminate the rest of my wool going through production. So I'm going to have a better yield and a better quality product if I remove that before processing. So I have to somehow take into consideration the value of this in that fleece. And typically, I'll sort out 8% of that bale. So 8% of every pound that comes in, I do a separate, we call it a light skirting. I'll remove that 8% prior to scouring because I know my quality of my finished product will be that much better if I can remove it prior to even washing that wool. And we have a variety of ways of using that raw wool that we skirt out initially. But typically, if you're going to be bringing value to your own clip and you want something made, definitely skirt that out yourself up front. It'll save you time, it'll save you money, and improve your quality of your final product. Going through again here, I have another small sample for you. This would be pretty common as well. This is kind of going to fall apart a little bit, but my desk is going to be a mess after this talk. This is a lot of short fibers, right? So this is what I'm pulling out. And these are second cuts. And they happen in shearing. You want to get that wool off there, but it's surprising how much volume of second cuts you can get depending on when that sheep is shorn or who shore that sheep. And those second cuts definitely decrease our quality. I have to wash that second cut. I've got to card it, put it through the whole production line. And then if it's short enough, I'll remove it during combing. But I've just added a lot of value to something that I'm going to be mechanically removing anyway. And so I don't want a lot of second cuts in that clip. And so again, if you're adding value to your own process or making something with your own wool, you want to take out those second cuts if you can. And generally, so we'll take a fleece and we'll just give it a quick shake and you'll see those second cuts just dropping out to the floor. Some people ask, well, how do you develop a skirting table? What do you do on site to get rid of that? We've made one in our own mill just for ease of use with just some PVC pipe. So 1/2-inch PVC, a 2x4 frame, and you put screws on both ends and you put those PVC pipes in and you create just a really easy, quick to use skirting table. So pretty low cost, but the value and the improvement of your quality can be pretty substantial if you do that on site prior or after shearing. So that'd be a big one where I see people not taking advantage of that value. Going into the paint question here. So I showed you that sample of the brand. It was confirming to me a few years ago at one of the ASI conferences, a couple of the, Chargeurs and Bowman, they're both up there talking about paint and the question of, is paint scourable or is it not? And it was good for me to hear that even at those large scale, they also have trouble removing all the paint from the wool. So there's scourable paint, but in reality, it's hard to get all of that paint out of that wool. So we work with ranchers to try and reduce the paint brand. And if they can go to ear tags, that's great. That brand is on that nice part of that wool. And if I have to pull that out, we just wasted some really good quality wool by having to remove it due to the paint from the brand. And so that's something to think about with your own clip. Some operations go paint free, and I'll pay a premium for a rancher who comes in and said, this is a paint free clip, just because I know I'm not going to, that handful of fleece from every fleece that we process, I don't have to remove that. So paint free, reducing your vegetation, your VM. A big problem I'll see from some operations is when they have to move due to whatever reason to new grazing, right? So they had to get a new lease, or some friends had some pasture and they allowed them to take their 40, 50 head down there to their pasture for, a month or something down there to get a little extra grass. And they didn't go out and check that range beforehand and see if there's any cockleburs. And so I might process from that one ranch or that one operation 1 year, and then the next year it comes in, and you can even feel on the outside of the bale. But then when we're going through and pulling those fleeces out for processing, and you start hitting those cockleburs, we almost want to throw the wool away just because it's such a pain to run through the machine. So those cockleburs, they just stick in that fiber, and it's hard to mechanically remove them. They jam into the machines get stuck on those cockleburs, creates a lot of problems for us is a burr in the processing. So That'd be a big one, and that's where, again, pull the wool over someone's eyes. I've had an operation that really good, good fiber in one year, and the next year just full of cockleburs, and they never said anything. I think they're hoping that we wouldn't catch on to that when it went through production, and you open up that bale, and all of a sudden there's just cockleburs everywhere, and it means like next year I probably won't buy from that producer when you start getting those types of interactions. But that's just some just general things there on value at the ranch or farm level. Just doing a basic skirting at the time of shearing. It also gives you, as the producer, the ranch, the owner of the farm, your eyes on that fiber. Your wool is your product, right? You're going out there to go sell it. Your name is behind it. Oftentimes I'll go to a ranch and the rancher is out running the gates and bringing the sheep in. And legitimately, that's a lot of work. You've got to know which sheep are coming in and where they're going. But really, that wool is the final product. And so it's nice to see a rancher who's really taking attention to detail and looking at that wool, and they know year to year. So it surprises me how often I talk to a ranch and you ask them, well, how does your wool look this year? And they say, I don't know, you tell me. And usually you would hope that as the producer, you've been looking at it, you've been watching it, you've been seeing it grow throughout this last year, and you should know before I do if there's some tender spots in it, if there's a fiber break, how the VM is looking, just kind of overall quality of that wool clip. I had a producer this past year, and due to shearing, they had to change when they shore their wool, and so to get in the line for shearing, they had to shear at 11 months rather than a full 12 months. And in general, it's probably not a big deal, especially on the large commodity scale. So when you're sending it out to Chargeurs or Bowman, I'll let Bruce and Larry talk to more about that. But at my scale, if we lose 1/12 of the fleece is gone due to shearing a month early, it can create a lot of problems in our downstream processing. So we want at least about a 3.5-inch staple that runs really well. 4 inch is preferred, and so we can create really nice fine yarns with that 3.5 to 4 inch long staple. A lot of our finer wools in Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, will get down closer to the 3-inch range, and so you lose 1/12 of that, and you can get down below 3 inches. And our machines just can't handle that short of fiber. It creates thick and thin spots in the yarn, and there's nothing I can do as a processor when that goes through production. There are times when I'll run, say I've got a ranch that has 10 bales of wool, and we might for some reason hit a bale and we have just problem after problem after problem in the production line. And going back, we kind of ask ourselves, did we miss something about that staple length when it went through? Or did we miss something? Was there some tender wool in there? Maybe it was a batch of sheep. There's only 40 or so sheep that fit a bale. Maybe that batch of 40 that went through, maybe that was some of the older ewes. Maybe they were on a different pasture and they had a little more stress sometime during the summer. Maybe they were a little sickly, right? So they had some nutrition issues. And so those 40 sheep at our scale, we'll notice that those 40 sheep process differently, and it can create a lot of problems. And so knowing that on the ranch level or on the farm level and really taking into consideration, how is my nutrition? When I move pasture, am I being very careful to make sure I've got plenty of water and plenty of food for those animals when they move? Am I reducing their stress? Because the last thing you want is to have a little stress break in the middle of that fiber. I take that nice long 4-inch fiber and I drop it down to 2 inches when it starts breaking in production. So thinking about those things ahead of time is very important. And I would definitely recommend that you get a hold of, a sheep specialist. I know you've got Chad down there now in Utah, and you got Whit here in Wyoming. These people have this expertise to help you answer some of those questions on nutrition to a large degree in terms of how are these different ranch management practices going to affect my final wool clip. I know ranchers who, it's multiple generations, so 2-3 generations, and I'll look at that wool and we'll give it a quick pull and it snaps in the middle, and they're like, well, why did that happen? And so you start working back and you look at the length of that fiber and you're like, well, was that sometime, maybe June, July? And they're like, oh yeah, we had to move pasture for some certain reason. And likely they stressed those sheep out and it created a weak spot, and those fibers are going to break. So just really thinking through the entire year, your management practices, and seeing how that's going to affect the wool quality. I think we do a poor job across the board in the US of really looking at wool as a great quality product. and usually it's a byproduct almost. And so I think putting more emphasis into that is important. I also wanted to talk about your unique wool breeds. I think in the US, we have a great diversity of breeds, and that's growing. So some of the information that the USDA has been producing or publishing talks about how the future of the wool industry in the US is going to be more and more of your small flocks. So it's 100 animals or less, and that means more diversity of wool. So it's going to be less uniformity, and that creates a lot of challenges. Um, so at our scale, even as well, you might get Rambouillet from one operation, Rambouillet from another, and it processes very differently. And that's going to be more true as we start developing these smaller scale hobby farms, small operations, which are great. I think it gets more animals on the land and produces more wool, but you have to be really careful about how those genetics. So you can't just always get the cheapest animal from the cheapest buck here and there and throw that in just because it was what was available. It's being more intentional about the product that you are producing and knowing that it can take years to develop a really good genetic line where you have a consistent product year after year. And I think that is a challenge of the small operations, but also a strength. So if you look at Lincoln wool, Finn sheep, a variety of these breeds, it's fun for us as a small regional processor to process those into a unique product that utilizes the strengths of that breed. So I might take some Lincoln wool and make a saddle blanket out of it. That Lincoln wool is going to be long and strong. It's going to have high luster. It's going to create a very durable, long-lasting saddle blanket. Whereas if I put in a fine Rambouillet, it'll still make a nice saddle blanket, but it's going to not wear as well as it would with one of those coarser breeds. So similar to Albert, utilizing those different breeds, those different micron ranges. And I think it takes creativity and a lot of effort to really find those niche markets for those breeds, but I think they do exist, especially as the consumer is becoming more conscious and wanting to know where their food comes from. They also want to know where their wool, their garments come from. And so I think utilizing that and building upon that consumer demand to know the story behind their products they're wearing, I think that helps us as well. When we talk about the consumer, one of the big things to look at is that story and how that story is so important. So one of the things that I think we fail to look at is the story of our own wool. So adding value to your wool is sometimes as simple as adding value to your own story. So that maybe that's your ranch management practices. Maybe you're doing something unique on your operation to take care of the land, take care of the resources, take care of the animals. I think the AWA program, that is another, hey, I'm implementing this, I'm taking the extra effort to do this. To me, as a regional processor, that is what I like to see. It doesn't matter what effort it is, it just shows that you are taking an intentional effort to make your product better. And I think that's where I see growth in the industry happening, is innovation and development of these new products around just the simple intention of making your product better. And that's what I like to see. I'll highlight this real quick. This came in the mail just yesterday. I won't highlight the name on it, but I get a little envelope in the mail, and included is this nice little note from a small operation. And it says, in 2020, they give me a little letter here. I could read that one. They stopped by and took a tour of the facility. They really like what we do. And so in this letter, there's 2 pictures of their family, their operation, where they raise their sheep, some samples of their wool. And to me, it tells me that this family, they are trying to make their product better, trying to develop their story, and trying to find a way to keep their operation going for their future generations. And that's super important. I can't stress it enough, is really having that intentionality about what the next generation is going to do on your own operation. How do you do something now that helps them, helps your kids, helps your grandkids take over in subsequent generations and keep your operation sustainable? And this is one where, I've now looked at their wool and it's beautiful. It's nice, long, strong, clean. Granted, I get a little fleece. And so, there's none of us out here or watching where you want to pick the best clip or the best lock of wool that you could find from that animal when you send it into someone to look at. But I mean, just from that one lock, it's great. It's long and strong, and it's just beautiful. And so they actually offered in their letter was, hey, can I bring a bale of wool just for you to try? I mean, I want to take the effort on my end to put my wool into your production queue. And I think that as a small producer or small processor, I don't have the capacity to get the finest wool from everybody. So I have to be specific in who I use and what fibers I use. And so this helps me know, hey, this producer, they're willing to work. They want to bring a bale of wool here just sight unseen, just for me to get my hands on it, to see it. They are that confident in the quality and the value of their wool that they're willing to drive, in this case, probably about 500 miles to bring that bale of wool here to try and find a new market for their wool. And so I think using that as a case study is important for all producers to say, it's not going to be easy, and right now the wool markets aren't great. It's going to take a lot of hard work and determination to really find new value for your fiber, but it does exist and there are ways to do that. But it will be those ones who take that effort and do that hard work who are going to get ahead. And I think remembering that is important. I want to look at one thing real quick on this fleece here. And I know a lot of you are you've seen wool every day of your life. But for some of you, you might not see it either. So I take this little lock here, right? It's about the size of a pencil, and I pull on it, right? I give it a pull. Eventually, I will break that fiber, and I want to know how much strength it takes to break that fiber. So this one did break. All wool will break. It's not, it's not like we're dealing with steel here. But if I pull it and it's just a little bit of force and it just snaps right in half, it's too weak for me to process. And so again, that goes into nutrition, and I'm amazed. I talked to Whit Stewart. I talked to some other people in the industry and who have knowledge of the genetic side, the nutrition side, and there's a lot that goes into making that wool fiber, the proteins that it's made up of, the nutrition that's required to make a good quality wool fiber. It's a fascinating fiber. Every day I'm fascinated by it, but there's a lot that goes into making it. And so making sure your animals have the nutrition they need to create that strong fiber is again something you can do on site with probably pretty little work. I was talking to a lady recently, and she had bought some bucks from one operation, and she had brought them to her ranch, and the wool quality was different. And she's like, "Hey, I know the genetics where these came from. They've got decades of research and data on their genetic line. Why is my wool so much different when I brought it to my new operation?" And there's a lot of factors, your environment, your nutrition, and they eventually came down to the conclusion that this was a lack of a nutrient that was coming from the soil. So it was a sulfur, and it was one of the lacking nutrients in this operation, and it just took some time to really figure out why and how can I improve that. So now they add in some sulfur into the diet to improve that wool quality. So a lot out there in terms of improving your quality. The easy ones, again, I'll kind of summarize the easy things to do: a light skirting table on site, get rid of, yes, the bellies, but the shearer usually does a pretty good job of getting the bellies out of there. But look for any tags. Like, so when I hold this up and I see, tags weigh a lot, right? So if you're thinking, oh, if I stuff it in there, I get an extra couple pounds in that bale. Well, yes, that's true. But if you're going to be processing it yourself into a product, so say you want me to make it into a blanket or hoodie or something out of it, you've just wasted your money by sending me this because I'm going to throw it out, and you had to pay for the shipping that, and you had to pay for me to go and skirt it out myself. So getting rid of some of those on site prior to shipping them in definitely improves your product in the long run. Vegetation is hard because I know it's a lot of operations, time of year, the weather. You might have to start feeding a lot of hay, straw, alfalfa. Just try to do so with the intention of knowing I don't want all that fiber, all that vegetation to get all stuck and embedded into that fleece. So trying to do things on the management side on your end to reduce the amount of vegetation that goes onto that fiber. And so just being conscious of that when you go in through your ranch. And again, if you do have to move those sheep throughout the year, making sure they have plenty of access to food and water and reduce that stress as much as possible, just to preserve any or prevent any of those mid-fiber breaks in that production. In general, that's kind of my overview for you all today. Hopefully that was helpful. Is there any questions that you got coming in that I can field?
Yeah, I think I'll let Melinda moderate those. Ben, one comment I was going to make is you talked about genetics and making those decisions on your replacement animals, whether they're replacement ewes or rams. I've sifted plenty of ewe lambs for growers in the area, and I always have to go back to basics and remind them that we have a better chance of improving our wool clip by testing our rams than we do our ewes. Because if we've got 1 or 2 outliers that are giving us 26 micron fleeces, and we're trying to keep our core at a 20, just by eliminating that RAM or being a little more selective with that RAM would reduce the need to go sift 300 head of replacement ULAM. So I think testing your RAMs is pretty important. Ben, I was going to prompt you the question, then I'll let Melinda moderate the rest. But you talked about removing those portions with high VM. Would you just recommend removing that crow's nest in between the shoulders altogether so you don't have to when it gets to your end?
Yeah, especially if you're a small scale. If you've got 10, 20 sheep and you want to make something with the wool, that's fairly easy for you to do when you're shearing 10 or 20 sheep, to just go and remove that crow's nest out of there. And that's where you're going to get it. That's where you're going to get a big mat of, straw or alfalfa or whatever is in there. You're going to see that there on that back of that neck. And so that'd be the easy one. Just pick that out and you've done a pretty big improvement into your quality. In processing, and maybe a lot of people probably don't know this, there's 2 kind of key styles of processing in the US, well, globally. And one would be your woolen style and one's your worsted style. A lot of your small mills, and there's about 120 small mills in the country. I call them mini mills. So they're a lot smaller than even we are. We're kind of a weird regional mill, but there's about 120 small mini mills in the country. So likely in every state, you'll find one if you do some looking. And they operate kind of a semi-worsted process, right? So they're kind of a weird blend, and they don't have a comb. And a comb is what removes all the vegetation, all the neps and pills off that fiber. So if you have wool and you want to send it to a real small processor and you want a great product, you have to remove that vegetation yourself on site, because they don't have the equipment to remove it at those small mini mills. We do have a comb here, and if I see it come in with a lot of vegetation, I tell the consumer, you have to comb it, otherwise your product is not going to be that great. So yes, I would take that crow's nest off that neck there.
Excellent. And if you haven't busted your knuckles on a carding spindle there, you're missing a great experience. That'll teach you a quick lesson on removing VM. You've got to clean out the cards. All right, Melinda, it's all yours.
Thank you. And one of the things I'll mention that you brought up several times with the nutrition is, if you're having issues with your wool, it's a pretty good indicator that you need to reevaluate your nutritional program. And like Ben mentioned, we're all here to help you with that. So there's no excuse not to. One of the first questions that we had was related to the paint brands, and you mentioned giving a premium to folks that could guarantee no paint. So would that be something that, if they were to remove each of the paint brands, would that fall in that category, or would you have to do something different there?
Yeah, generally, yeah, if they were to do it, so we don't buy a lot of single bale sources. So typically we want, from our set producers for stock yarns, we generally will get 4, 5, 6 bales is what we like to see. And so then you're looking at a quantity of animals where likely you need to either make your brand smaller. And so we have some ranchers who they went and re-welded and made new brands that were just half the size of their old brand. And that's enough on our end to do that. But if someone were to go and actually pick it out themselves, yes, I'd still pay a premium for that. And generally you're looking at about a 15 cents a pound premium. I got my end of what that's worth.
Great. We also had a question, if maybe you could expand a little on your operation. How much wool do you typically process in a year, and what type of yarn do you produce, woolen or worsted, and yarn count range and that type of stuff?
Sure, yeah. So we are, as a regional producer, we process, so we're going to do about 40 to 50,000 pounds of greasy wool a year will come through the facility. And so that'd be our general average. So we're making 20 to 25,000 pounds of yarn. We're a worsted mill. So we do have a comb to remove that vegetation and the neps and pills in that yarn as it goes through. Yarn counts. So yarn counts will typically do everything from heavy and bulky as like a real bulky, like a fisherman's sweater. So that's usually using, if you're familiar with yarn counts at all, like a numeric count of 2 or 3, even 1, so pretty heavy yarn. And we'll make all the way down to a 24 count in terms of a numeric count. And that'd be a single 24 will go down to some of your socks. It won't go into your really fine performance socks, but a lot of your fine wool socks would be using like a single 24 or a single 27. We're not meant to handle those very well. So long term, we hope to upgrade our fine wool capacity, our fine spinning capacity. Our kind of sweet spot would be your outerwear industry, not your base layer industry. So we don't have the capability to do base layer type yarns day in, day out. We're more of a sweater type facility, if that gives the easy way to look at it.
Great. The last question I have for you so far is, do you use acidification and ashing for VM these days?
No, we do not. And so, and I don't know actually on the commercial scale, I'm not sure if there's anywhere in the US that does do that. That'd be maybe Rita or someone might be able to answer that a little better. No, for VM removal, we mechanically remove it. So that'd be the combing process is a mechanical process that actually physically removes VM off of that fiber. In woolen mills, historically, there are a woolen mill, you can deal with shorter fibers. And so you don't really care about that long length. I mean, it is nice, but in a woolen style of process, you actually, a lot of times you'll dry out that fiber and then you crush it. And you're crushing out the VM and it falls out a little easier once it's been crushed, but you're also crushing some of your wool fibers. But in a woolen style, that's okay because you're dealing with those shorter fibers. They're not needing to be aligned and made for a parallel smooth yarn. And so different styles of production there, but no, we don't use any acids or anything to remove the VM.
Okay. Well, I think that's the last of the questions. Of course, you're going to be around for a little bit, I hope, for anybody who has further questions. And Whit, if you want, we can pull all of our panel members in and get started on the panel.
Absolutely. So now we're going to kind of run into a buyer panel, marketing panel. We're really grateful for our warehousers and buyers for the time they're taking to meet with us today. The way I'd like to start our panel is I will introduce each panelist. They'll have about 5 minutes to give us some 30,000 foot type view talking points, and then we can kind of direct questions as we go. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, so we'll have some adequate time to have some good conversation. We're going to start with Bruce Barker from Great Plains Wool. Bruce is all over the West, but we're proud to say that it's in Wyoming, right? Up in the basin. We're glad to have Bruce with us today. Bruce, I'll let you give a more thorough introduction and then just a 5-minute overview.
Yeah, thanks, Whit, for having me. And welcome everybody that wants to join in on these webinars. It gives a lot of information to people who don't really have any other way to find out things about the wool market. And that's the one thing Whit had asked me to talk about a little bit. So what's happening in the wool market right now. And actually there's a lot of really good possibilities in international sales these days. The prices are I guess you'd say, better than last year at this time, but at this time last year, someone could have said there was no market, but actually it's pretty good. We're having real serious delay in shipping problems though, going to Europe. Everybody saw the big Suez Canal fiasco that went on, but that's just a needle in the haystack of what's going on in the shipping world today. Talking with some of the international traders, prices of containers like today, container coming from China, they say is around $8,000 a load. And a year ago, you could do it under $4,000. And it's China to Italy. That's a big thing for the European mills. Their freight rates went all the way from $2,500 up to $8,000 to $10,000 a container. Just trying to get a load of wool shipped into Europe. The market has been pretty good, as I mentioned. The last few weeks, actually, we've seen it weaken slightly. The Chinese finally filled a bunch of huge contracts that their government had given them to fill. Second thing kind of weakened the market this past month was Europe's gone into multiple COVID shutdowns again. We can't seem to kick that problem. Every time we get a customer who's willing to take shipments every few weeks. And then all of a sudden we get the phone call, hey, don't ship anymore. The government shut us down. One of the third things, I just talked about all the shipping problems. It's not only international shipping, it's shipping here in the United States. For some reason, trucks are incredibly hard to find. A year ago, were paying under $2 per mile for trucking in this country with wool, and now we're paying $3 to $3.50 a mile for some trucking just to try to get wool moved to the mills. And so it's become a serious problem. But that being said, there's a lot of inquiry, and people do want to buy wool right now, especially 23 micron and finer. Those wools are very sought after. When you fall into the over 23 micron, it starts getting into a little bit tougher situation to move those fibers in this country. We don't have a lot of mills, just like Ben set up. I think everybody learns eventually they like to use the finer wools if possible in their product. And so that's one thing that we're running into, is the guys with a little bit coarser clips of wool. It's harder to move. And another thing we're also seeing this year is it was a very drouthy year over most of the West. And so there's quite a bit of short wool. These clips are all sorting out. Some of the ones I've seen from Utah, Western Wyoming, Western Colorado, some of the clips as much as half of the clip going into what they call their short line, their A2 line. And those wools are very hard to get rid of right now. We still have some possibilities to move those shorter clips to China. But as everybody knows, we're kind of in a trade war right now with them. There are tariffs being put on our products going into that country. So that's affected our off sorts and our short wools tremendously.
Bruce, thank you. That's excellent. We're going to come back to you with some questions. So clearly there's a theme there of shipping and logistics related to the international and domestic shipping market. So I'm going to have you go into that a little bit more. Our next panelist is Larry Prager from Center of the Nation Wool out of Belle Fourche, South Dakota. Larry is a UW alum, has employed a couple of UW kids up there. We're grateful for that. Larry, take it away.
Yeah, good afternoon, Whit. Is my camera working? Everything okay?
Yep.
Well, good afternoon for sure. I think I'm going to start my conversation. Many of the things that were already discussed are certainly important, and I'm going to start with sharing. I think we're fortunate that generally in our trade region that we've got some really good shearing crews. And early on in the season, there was a real question mark whether or not we were going to have enough shears, work permits, and all that goes with importing labor, depending on foreign labor resources. And some of that, I'm not on the front line of that, but just generally, our crews have been working well. I think they're generally on time. We've had a few weather delays, but fairly minor at this point. And we get, this week we're talking rain and some inclement weather, and I'm sure some of that's going to be a little bit of a problem. But so far, shearing has gone pretty well. We're getting excellent bales in. Most lots very well packaged and prepared. A lot of things are going better in the shearing industry than I thought they might back in first part of January. Wool quality and conditions. Generally, we had an open winter. It was a warm, open winter, very little ground cover, in a huge section of the U.S. And so, as Bruce said, we're seeing a little more dust. Yields are down a little bit, but the wools are well grown, coming in our doors, very dry, very white. They're coming out of dry pasture. Very little stain, very few tags. Just a lot of things about that were just super white, shiny, and a good product of a dry open winter. That said, yields are down a little bit, and so we're going to sell them a little more dust this year along with the wool for sure. As far as wool marketing is concerned, I think that deserves a little bit more of the airtime. We survived 2020, but in many cases, not very well. Going to 1 year ago right now, COVID-19 was just getting going. If you remember, every month was seemed like, I think all of us had the idea that all we had to do was wait for just a minute, and 30 days and COVID-19 would be on by, and we could pick up our tools and go back to work. That really didn't happen. And through July and August, the industry in Australia, the wool auctions were setting new 10-year lows nearly every week. So by the time we got to Labor Day, we had some recovery to do. So September was some help. October, November were sure better. And that fast forward to January and February, both of the January, February 2021 were pretty strong in the Australian wool sections. Certainly helped our prices. And so as we got going, January and February were good. We were able to move quite a lot of wool. I've been selling and offering wool pretty aggressively since about the 1st of February. We had some carryover wool of growers that came in last spring that just chose to set it on storage. And we've been moving most of those. I think most of the older lots that we're in a position to sell generally have moved on into the marketplace. Now, the lots that are short, and we used to call them the China types, and that's a little bit unfair, but short types, wools that have a defect of any kind, whether it's a heavy, poor yielding, high veg lots, length and strength issues, those wools are still sitting on the sidelines and maybe for a while. They're still in trouble generally. Okay, but I think the bottom line is that the well-prepared and class lots are again leading the charge, and particularly on the real fine end. Certainly, we've seen 18, 19, 20 micron wools that maybe the last 2 or 3 years would be similar in value to a 21, 22. That market profile, there's some pretty significant premiums on some of these real fine wools. And so with that, I'll finish my short summary here. Generally speaking, good wools, market's pretty active. Whether March came and went, and so far April without really anything to help us, but no significant declines either. Bruce mentioned freight. I'll tell you what, freight rates have, for whatever reason, whether you can blame that on COVID-19 or not, I don't know, but freight rates have gone through the roof. And that's by far, in the warehouse business, at least in our shop, our biggest expense. So it's very significant.
Well, that's a development that I guess this is really good that we're having this discussion that many probably weren't aware of unless you're paying that freight bill. Thank you, Larry, for that update. Our next panelist is Mike Korn from Roswell Wool. As the name would indicate, Mike is coming to us from New Mexico, but with warehouses in California as well. Mike, we'll make sure you're unmuted. There you are. Thanks for joining us. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, Whit. Thanks for thinking about us Southern guys down here with your webinar. It's great information. I've been logged in on it for a bit and enjoyed the conversation, and I appreciate your efforts. I don't know if many of you know who I am, but I'm co-owner of Roswell Wool down here in New Mexico. And after following Prager and Bruce, it's kind of hard to have some other topics to talk about. They pretty much hit every target that I had marked down. So I'll say ditto to everything that Larry and Bruce have said. We do have a warehouse out in Bakersfield, California, and we're pretty aware of the export situation and the backup on the cargo, the containers. It's created quite a problem. And so I know if we're going to get that worked out in time to get through this, help us on this season or not, but they're certainly working at it hard. I'll kind of elaborate a little bit about the carryover wools from 19 even and on into 20. I was our warehouse out in California. We ended up with well over about 1.5 million pounds of carryover wool from 2020. Since then, we've marketed about half of those wools. The producers have all had an opportunity, those that we still have. Pardon the train in the background if you can hear it going by. All the producers, those that haven't sold, have had prices run at them, but have been reluctant to sell, willing to kind of sit back and just see where it goes further. And so we'll see what happens. We're going to have a sale here on the 29th and 30th of this month. And I don't know how that's going to go. Utah Wool has got a sale the week before. So we'll find out a little more, but I think most of you found the wool market is a little higher than it was this time last year. So, okay, that's cool. But this time last year, pretty much to date, maybe a couple of weeks later, you couldn't give it away. So it was significant improvement there. We haven't talked about the Wool Lab and the Wool Lab situation, or I haven't heard you talk about it in your prior conversation, Whit. I don't know. Have you all talked about the Wool Lab?
We've talked about the Wasatch Wool Lab coming to fruition, but we haven't talked about the AgriLife Lab. Please go ahead and take that away, Mike.
Okay, well, the lab down here in Texas is in full swing. They're still going hard and strong to have it in production and ready to go for the 2022 production year, next year. They had some setbacks with deliverance of equipment, but ASI has worked hard to help get the funding to purchase a good bit of the equipment that's going into the new lab. And, we as an industry voted to support the Texas lab. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how this all plays out. The lab results that we're getting from New Zealand have been very pleasing to both the producers and to the buyers, I believe. We get more information. It's readily available through the computer. And so, yeah, we'll see how that all goes. But I wanted to just mention that the Wool Lab is in full swing, and we anticipate to see it going for the spring 22 clip. With that, I don't need to bore you anymore. I don't think I have anything to add to what Larry said or Bruce. It's dittos on all, so I'm happy to sit back and take questions if there's something available.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for prompting us on that discussion on the analytical side. I think what I'd like to do is I'll kind of direct certain questions to certain individuals. That doesn't preclude the others from commenting, but that'll keep some order to start the conversation, and then I'd encourage the other panelists to chime in. One theme that has come up a little bit is that it's harder to market those 23, 24 micron than coarser. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as we wait for that market to come back, maybe if it won't, do you see opportunities for some domestic products being manufactured in that micron range to capture some of that value? Obviously, it's a different fiber type, different endpoint use, but there's a lot of wool that's going to be piling up. What are your thoughts? Bruce, why don't you go ahead and start that conversation?
There are some smaller hand knitting yarn companies that are actively using those, but it gets down to the quantity that we have in this country. We have quite a large tonnage of wools that fall between the 23 and 25, 26 micron range. And it seems like all these hand knitting yarn companies in recent years have started leaning to the finer side instead of the coarser end. And right now, that's really the only outlet other than international sales, which, as I iterated earlier, has been very slow on those coarser types that I've been able to find.
Larry, Mike, any thoughts on that?
I think I would only say that 24 micron and finer represents quite a lot more value than, coarser than 24. And interestingly enough, the profile of the clip in our region has moved finer again. I mean, it just seems like every year we're moving finer. Yeah, if I'm going to sell a load of 23.5 micron wool, I really kind of have to know where it's at, because they just don't come in the door like they did 10 years ago. And I think 2021 is going to be finer again. Just interesting to me that we're moving just the average of the clip, and they're the same ranches, the same pastures, just continue to get a little bit finer.
Yeah, I agree with that. It seems that Wyoming, South Dakota, Montana especially have all gotten finer. And I think it's because of the value of the wool. I mean, there's quite a large jump in there. Like Larry said, 24 micron and over. In some cases, you're dropping $1 clean.
And it's hard to get the price discovery, I think, too. I mean, it's frustrating sometimes. We just don't see a whole plethora of data reported on prices in the 25, 26, 27 range. And we buy such a small amount for wool judging purposes, but consistent reports on those levels are harder to come by. Mike, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
I didn't have much to add there other than the fact that there is being some, not a lot, but the use of the superwash system there at Chargeurs. They're being able to blend some of these 25s, 26s in with some finer wools and make certain like some types of socks. But that's a limited amount. But with technology, it seems like we're gaining all along on how fibers of different microns can be used. So I think it's just a matter of time. But yeah, it's right now, it's those 25 and 6 micron wools, they're getting stacked up in a lot of places. So that's a little fearful.
Excellent point. I think that's something we forget sometimes. Tops are blended to a spec, and they don't always have to be 19 to make a 22 top, right? It takes a little bit of some and other. I know there's a formula to that, but that's often something I think that's omitted from the conversation that is worth talking about. We've got a comment here just from one of our participants, just talking about some of the challenges with COVID. Being a trucker has created some shortages in labor. Anyways, I think that's something that I appreciate you all bringing up. One question I wanted to pose, and I guess I want to open this up to all three, because I think this affects everybody in the industry, and you guys are drivers in it. And I think it's USDA price reporting. In your opinion, that process of whoever the market reporter is getting in touch with you and saying how much has been traded and at what price point, do you think that there's room for improvement in that system of price reporting? And if so, what would you recommend to maybe improve that? I'm probably going to get in trouble for this question, but I do want to.
Yep.
It's an elephant in the room for us, I think. So.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Well, I think there's definitely room for improvement, but the problem is as we all know, we're in a pretty tiny industry in this country. You're looking at 3 of the 4 probably outlets for wool in the West. And, Will is the other one. And it's so competitive. It's such a competitive industry that nobody really is willing to want to go out and tell the world, hey, I just bought a clip of wool and I paid $4.25 for it. And, let's see what Mike will pay tomorrow for one, and it's the nature of the beast, I think. And we have a real hard time, especially in those mid-micron ranges like you were talking about, because Australia's not even reporting prices on those. I mean, if you have the means, you can actually find out what 23, 24, 25 micron fleece wools are bringing in Australia. But as far as having a AWEX price on those micron categories, we go months at a time and they never report a 23, 24, 25 micron price. And one reason being is in Australia, there are two ways to go now with your sheep. Evidently, everyone's going super fine or they're going to the meat breeds. And that's left a huge void in the center. And that's opened up. That's one reason, in my opinion, that we're having a hard time moving 24, 25 micron top or even grease wool around the world, is because the Chinese are starting to create that type of top, blending 29 micron and 16 micron together, because the way the price point is, they can produce that top to meet a customer's specs and end up with a terrible yarn.
I'll follow up, Bruce. I think that there's no question that the price reporting services and the accuracy of that could be improved. I think the goal of that always is to find reliable market information, for the grower perspective. And so, yeah, one of the challenges has always been that we very seasonal in our marketing patterns, or even last year when COVID-19 came along, there was very little marketing done. And there's lots of months in the year that very little wool gets traded. And so we've always got the seasonality aspect. And then secondly, the accuracy of it all. I think USDA has done what they can to gain that information, but is there a lot of improvement can be made? No question about that.
I guess you want me to comment on it after Larry?
Yes, sir.
When I was with ASI, we went through all the mandatory price reporting arguments for lamb, and we fought it basically my whole tenure with ASI. There was always something going on with mandatory price reporting and why we couldn't get it, confidentiality issues and yada yada. And then Packer shut down, another one started up, I asked for, and we took it to USDA at one time, and it was supported by the ASI's executive board to pursue looking into mandatory price reporting for wool. And that threw a lot of red flags for certain people, but it's hard to get information, and there needs to be, it's not Larry's responsibility or Bruce's responsibility or myself's responsibility to pick up the phone and call USDA every time we make a sale or fill out a paper. There needs to be some footwork from the other side. And I think that's part of what we're missing. And I'm probably going to get hammered on that, but that's the way I stand. But I thought, as a producer as well, myself a producer, I'm in favor of mandatory price reporting for lamb, and I'm in favor of mandatory price reporting for wool, because we need that information, and our industry's just gotten so small. And kind of like Bruce was saying earlier, Larry said, it's very competitive, but it's on a small scale. But anyway, that's kind of where I stand. If there's a question else, I'll be happy to take it.
Follow up on that. Is it possible for growers to report those prices, or does the market reporter only want your reports? I mean, what's your familiarity with that? Clearly, there's some confusion.
Yeah,
Mike
sure.
might know better than I do, but I know that Chris Diaz has told me he has to have a certain quantity of a micron category before he can even report it. And some people are reporting prices because they sold their wool in the grease. Other people are reporting if it was a clean price. And there's been a real problem for the USDA to figure out how to tie those two together to be able to report accurate pricing. A lot of times, of course, the three of us, we know exactly when one of the big sales in the country's over, what certain micron categories we're bringing. But it would seem to take USDA 2 weeks to ever get those prices out into the public. And by
Yeah.
then the market could be totally different.
Yeah, well said.
The other thing that will happen with, sometimes the growers report it perhaps, and then a warehouse or something that went through there. I've seen cases where an individual sale got reported at least twice.
Definitely.
Well, I'm hoping that some of this discussion will precipitate some action. I think each year last year, I know we had a similar conversation, and I think I appreciate your comments because it isn't just on you guys. I think but a system that would be a little bit more clear, I think would help maybe incentivize some of the growers and others to be accurate in their reporting. And I think maybe that's something that we could hopefully help with. I don't want to pivot away from that. Thank you for opening that can of worms. I appreciate it. Again, your bribes and kickbacks will be sent speedily. I think there's a good question from our colleague Brent Rader up in Montana State. He said there's been a lot of talk about how the wool suiting or clothing industry is kind of on the decline because of the casualization of the workplace, working remotely. What are your thoughts on that, and where do you feel the wool clothing industry is headed with your crystal balls?
I have no clue.
I think
Go
I
ahead.
would say, I know there's two categories of people who we know like to wear wool and are willing to pay basically whatever the price is. And that is hunters and skiers.
Yeah.
So we've seen a lot of, the smaller manufacturers around the country producing fine wool products that they can wear as base layers as well as mid layer.
So maybe less of the formal type applications. There's still some momentum. Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we all would agree that society is less formal today and more casual, than we were, say, 5 years ago or even 10. And specific to the last year, my kids are working at home. Instead of going to the office, the tailored office where in 2020, the retail market had to have been as flat as it could possibly be. We saw bankruptcies at Brooks Brothers, J. Crew, just for a couple. I think I know there are quite a few others. I think that's one of the real questions of wool marketing for 2021 is a demand for, let's call them tailored office wear, textiles. I think we'd all agree that the fine gauge knitwear, the base layers, performance gear, wool socks is alive and well. But the big end of, let's call it the worsted cloth business, goes into tailored office wear. And I don't know who knows how long the recovery phase is there.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
No, I don't have anything further to add there. I'm kind of with them. You get away from the sporting section, it's that's the main target for increased use here in the country, in my opinion. But that's about all I've got to say about it.
I had one more question while we're kind of waiting. We'd ask those remaining participants just a couple more minutes, and then we're going to wrap this up. One question I had when I was down in some of the labs in Argentina and Uruguay, tremendous amount of color testing down there. Obviously, those are fine wool producing countries, a lot of high quality wool coming out of there. What demand, when you guys are trading internationally, do you get wanting some color in the wool that you trade? I mean, wanting a color estimate, a lab standard measured color estimate. Do you ever get those inquiries or those requests?
Yeah, we have a color test on every sample we send to New Zealand. We get a color test. However, that being said, some of the mills in this country are not able to really correlate what they're getting out of their yarns with those color tests. And it seems to be that their color testing for the fine wool is not holding near as true as it is for their coarser New Zealand types.
Larry, Mike?
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead, Larry.
That's an area that I really have limited experience in. Don't have much conversation on it all. So I defer to whatever Bruce or Mike have to say.
Do you color test any, Larry? Do you guys get the color test done on samples?
We have, but not routinely.
Mike?
Here in Roswell, we test all of our wool for color. I will say though that most of the buying interest for the color is for clips that predominantly stay in the States anyway. And so what I'm trying to say is the wools that are due for export anyway that I handle, the color isn't quite so important to those guys. But to these top end, the domestic and military, some of that we go to Uruguay or to Bulgaria with, I should say, would ask for some, but it's just being used limited amount of use, but people are learning how to read it, know what it says, and black fiber counts will be next. We can talk about, and that's just another way for us to help improve our clips. And the seed stock producers, there's some seed stock guys that I know around that are really taking interest in the test and making adjustments in their breed and their studs to improve their clips. So we're seeing it from several directions, from you guys up in that part of the country to out in Nevada, the merino type wools coming from over there. It's improving. Like we said earlier, the wool clip in general is improving across the country, in my opinion. And yeah, color is important, but I don't see it as I don't know how to say it, Whit, but it's they're still learning how to use it. Most of them are.
Yeah, and I guess I should have prefaced those labs down south, they're IWTO labs, and a lot of those, their coarser stuff isn't being tested. It's predominantly their 21 and finer, but interesting just to see some of the differences in some of our labs. I wonder what A&M's plans are for some of those. And Albert, are you planning on doing color in your lab?
Right now, we're not doing color testing. That may be something that we expand into, kind of like what Larry, Mike, Bruce said. For what we've seen in the US, there hasn't been a huge demand in what the color. Our wool clip, I know that we did the sample that was sent away to New Zealand. I think New Zealand has a standard test, color test that's just part of that. Because we did have that color tested on our wool clip.
Excellent. Well, I think we've tortured many of our panelists for a long time, and those that are on. We're going to wrap up a little bit early, but I'd just like to thank everyone who's participated today. It's really takes a community to keep things vibrant in our industry, and I know how competitive it is, and I appreciate all of you for being so transparent and willing to share today.